Thank you, Jordana. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Henri Blas. I'm the Chief Content Officer for the Global Infrastructure Hub. We're very pleased to be back for the second webinar of New Deals, Funding Solutions for the Future of Infrastructure. This webinar will be focused on the green recovery for cities and the role the private sector can play. So we all know that governments are facing unprecedented fiscal constraints as a result of the pandemic. Despite those constraints, governments are trying to use infrastructure investment more and more to create both an immediate economic recovery, but also a real leap forward when it comes to long-term environmental and social outcomes. This is a complex equation. This is even more complex for cities. They were obviously on the front line of the response to COVID, and they're still on the front line of the recovery. Funding and financing is, in particular, a critical challenge, especially since they usually have less tools available compared to central governments. So what we'll see today, though, is that through two examples, is that with the right policy enablers and using innovative approaches, those challenges can be overcome. And it's actually possible to get the private sector to play a critical role in cities when it comes to infrastructure. So the opportunity to share innovation that addresses those type of challenges was a starting point for the series. The GI Hub, created in 2021, an innovative funding and financing tool in response to a G20 request for practical solutions and levers to increase private investment in infrastructure. The G20 Infrastructure Working Group has actually asked us to continue progressing the discussion around those topics in our role as a hub for creating connections and share knowledge in the infrastructure community. So we're therefore very pleased to be partnering with IFC and expert panelists today to deliver this webinar series. We know how valuable it is to learn from other successful transactions and find solutions that can be transferred to your jurisdiction and your projects. And that's really the purpose of this series, to create an interactive environment where you can ask questions and hear it directly from the panelists. So we go through two projects, and at the end, the last 15 to 20 minutes will actually be open for you to ask questions to all the panelists together. So I'm really, again, pleased that today we'll have the opportunity to hear from projects in the water and the waste sectors in particular. So those two sectors, they usually a little bit get less attention and funding than transport and energy, but they're very critical for cities and their resilience. So back to the format to facilitate this session. Michael, as Jordana explained, we are using the Slido platform. You can use the direct link in the QR code that has been placed in the chat to access Slido and submit questions. There'll also be interactive polls during the session using, again, Slido. So as I said earlier, we'll have a facilitated panel discussion for about 30 minutes, followed by about 15 minutes of Q&A with all the speakers. And our colleague will be monitoring the questions as they come in. So I really encourage you to ask your questions through Slido when you think of them, when you have them, and make sure to ask as many questions as possible, and people will have a chance to vote. Thanks for that. And now we would like to introduce my fellow presenter, Cheryl Edleson Hanway. She's the Regional Industry Senior Manager for Infrastructure at the IFC. And she'll speak shortly about IFC's work in the area and then introduce the panelists and the transactions we're gonna talk about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Henri, and thank you for having me here today. Good morning, good afternoon, and even good evening to all of the participants. It's really fantastic to see so many people connected from around the globe. I'm delighted to be co-hosting this second webinar in the joint Global Infrastructure Hub IFC series on funding solutions for the future of infrastructure. As Henri already mentioned, it's a fabulous platform to exchange and share ideas, convene a series of conversations via invited guests to share tangible project and investment examples, and all in an aim to try to further invest in infrastructure development and investment, particularly in emerging markets, and seeking to crowd in and leverage private partners, private capital, and know-how. To set the stage for today's discussion, we all know that cities have a central and even an outsized role to play in financing, building, and delivering urban infrastructure and infrastructure services in the future. Today, they already generate 80% of global GDP, And by 2050, it's estimated that 70% of the global population will live in cities. Actually, the figure's already above this in many regions and parts of the world. As Henri already mentioned, we also know that cities bear the brunt of the effects of both climate change and the COVID pandemic. So today, cities are sitting at a crossroads, but also faced with a huge opportunity, asking themselves, how do they want to build back better? How can they set themselves on a path for recoverable and sustainable future growth that's green and sustainable going forward? At IFC, we think there's a tremendous opportunity for this. As the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, we've been investing and operating in more than 100 countries globally and already have a very active cities business. It was launched, in fact, in the region that I represent, emerging Europe and Central Asia. We want to continue to support our urban partners around the world tackling the challenges of green and sustainable growth. We do it through a variety of different approaches, business models, and solutions. You'll see we invest both directly with cities as well as their municipal companies and utilities, but also support private sector players, particularly as they enter the picture under private-public partnership type models. In the past 15 years, we've invested and mobilized more than $9 billion in financing to more than 280 projects that have been related to cities or urban and municipal infrastructure and services. We absolutely, as a longstanding player in the sector, want to continue to support cities as they tackle the challenges going forward. With the diverse audience that we have connecting today, including a variety of policymakers, it's key to emphasize that obviously enabling frameworks, clear policies are very key to this, but also patience, perseverance, and trusted long-term partners. You'll hear from the panelists firsthand today. Private sector capital and solutions, as well as innovation, are also key. And they're going to be even more so going forward, particularly with the limited fiscal space in national and municipal budgets as a result of COVID. And so bringing the private sector in and private sector financing solutions in to catalyze win-win solutions to help cities address their complex and growing needs as they try to become increasingly green and sustainable is going to be key. Today, we're honored to be joined by senior experts from two groundbreaking projects who will share their experiences, the lessons learned, and the insights and illustrations that they've had as they've partnered in making cities have a green transition. The first project is Belgrade Waste-to-Energy. It's a landmark municipal level PPP project, bringing a sustainable waste management solution to the city of Belgrade. Essentially, it's converting the largest open dump site in Europe. It's been spilling waste as well as waste residue into the Danube River, and that's being transformed into a new managed landfill, as well as energy generation facilities to deliver both power and heat to Serbia's grid. The second project we'll feature is a project undertaken by Corsan. Corsan's a founding member of IFC's Utilities for Climate program. It's illustrating through their investments how a public water utility is leveraging private finance to reduce losses in the municipal water distribution network and to mitigate climate change in Brazil. It's also noteworthy that the Corsan case, which will be expanded on by the panelists as we enter into the discussion, is putting in place a sustainability-linked financing structure that IFC helped them to put in place for the investment. This is among the first such structures being utilized in emerging markets with significant potential for more to come, and with IFC helping to lead in this space. So with that, let me stop, quickly welcome and introduce the panelists, which you can see up on the screen already. And first is Mr. Stephane Heddesheimer. He's the CEO of Recycling and Recovery of Suez in Asia. He's been deeply involved from the very beginning in the Belgrade Waste-to-Energy-Project. Secondly, we have Mr. Roberto Barbuti. He is the CEO of Corsan Water, joining us as well. And then finally, we have Mr. Gustavo Pimentel. He's a managing director of Citaui. This is a leading sustainable finance second opinion provider in Brazil. And in his remarks, he'll help explain a bit further exactly what that means. So to help us get started today, let me turn first to Stephane. Welcome, Stephane. Thanks for joining us. I've given a bit of an introduction already, but can you briefly describe the Belgrade Waste-to-Energy-Project, as well as the Serbian context and framework in which the project is being developed? And then finally hit on how you see the benefits of the project going forward.
Thank you, Cheryl. Hello, everyone. Yeah, as you hinted already, Cheryl, the Belgrade Waste-to-Energy-Project, as we call it, it's an initiative that was taken by the city of Belgrade. That's the capital of Serbia. There's about 2 million people living in the area that is covered by the project, and the purpose is to put an end to that very negative environmental impact that's caused by the municipal dump site, which is in a place called Vincha. It's situated 15 kilometers about from the city center, and you can see a picture, I believe, right behind me of that site. The dump site, it was opened more than 40 years ago. It's on the right bank of the Danube, which you can see in the background. And over time, that dump site it accumulated more than 20 million tons of waste, over 50 hectares. It rises 50 meters above the ground. So it's a huge dump site, as you noted, one of and actually the largest still active in Europe in terms of uncontrolled dump sites. And it discharges every year tens of thousands of cubic meters of polluted water, what we call leachate, to the Danube. And there's also a lot of methane that comes from the emissions from the waste, degradation of the waste that goes untreated directly to the atmosphere. And as we all know, it's a very potent greenhouse gas. And from time and again, if parts of the landfill took fire, and it happened actually several times, you would smell the smoke and get even ashes and dust right as far as the city center. I mean, as I said, 15 kilometers from the place. So with the right winds, it would directly been quite smellable and visible from the city. And last but not least, there were more than 100 people from the Roma community that were actually living on and literally living off the landfill, scavenging, plastic bottles, pieces of cardboard, all sorts of stuff under actually quite terrible conditions. So the issue, that's the context. The issue, well, the city of Belgrade was kind of short of money to invest into a better system. Let's just keep in mind that Serbia, well, it's in Europe, but it's not part of the EU, right? It's what is called a pre-accession country. And thus it has actually no access to the cohesion funds, these subsidies which allowed many of the neighbors like Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia that are parts of the EU. These neighbors, they receive from EU billions of euros to upgrade their environmental infrastructure, but Serbia didn't. So faced to this challenge, the city decided to organize a PPP tender with the support of IFC, where the private sector would finance, build, and operate for 25 years modern waste treatment facilities, including a waste-to-energy plant and a waste recycling facility for construction waste. And the private partner would also take responsibility for the closure, the remediation, and the long-term aftercare of the Vincha dump site. That's what the project is about.
Thank you, Stephane. I mean, clearly a landmark project for the region as well as the country. I know it's a really important project for Suez as well, and I would be thrilled to hear you sort of expand on sort of what you've learned in terms of lessons or how you see this formulating strategy and looking forward for Suez as a result of the experience in Belgrade.
Well, yeah, well, Suez mission, it's all about protecting the environment, right? And turning waste into resources has been part of a know-how for close to 100 years now. So we've been on the market for that time, and actually we working with local governments is part of our DNA. Now, we had worked with Belgrade in the past, but it was a very long time ago, at the time of Yugoslavia, when the time we designed and built for the city a drinking water treatment plant, which actually still operates. So at the time of this project, it was a totally new country for us. Well, and maybe, let's face it, maybe not such an attractive one to invest in. I mean, Serbia was, and actually is still as of today, below investment grade, right? Precisely at the time, it had a Ba3 Moody's rating. So it's below what we call investment grade, where you can have better financing conditions when you invest in infrastructure typically. And the price tag for the project, it was very, very high. We estimated it at around 350 million euros. And obviously there were some affordability concerns behind as well, given the living standard in the country. But from Suez perspective, there were a number of reasons that made us look quite seriously into the project. Well, first and foremost, there was, let's say, basically no question that the project made sense, a lot of sense. It had, I mean, we just saw the picture, and I described the impacts, right, of that dump site. And this project, it had a very strong political support from the decision-making authorities, both at the city level and at the central government level. Now, there was a site for the project, quite obviously. There was a decent feed-in tariff for the power that would be produced by the waste-to-energy plant. But as you noted, there was also the possibility to deliver heat to the district heating network of the city. So when you can operate in such a facility, both by producing power and steam, you operate in a CHP, combined heat and power mode, as we call it. This maximizes the energy efficiency. And obviously, if you can sell both, then you can attract more revenues for your project. And finally, the city had chosen IFC to advise, and that's important. Hopefully also IFC was chosen to lend to the project. We also knew EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, they were also very eager to support that project. We could also line up some very good partners to share the investment with us as equity investors, right? We had Itochu, it's a Japanese company or partner in many water and waste infrastructure projects around the world. And we had the Margaret Funds, with whom we had developed a project in Poland, in Poznań, as well, a waste-to-energy one. So many good conditions to look at the project, but at the core of our decision, if you will, there was a potential innovation we were very eager to explore. You've got lots of cities, in emerging countries, they must close their dump sites like Vinča. And Vinča, it's actually only one of the 50 largest in the world. The International Solid Waste Association, they put together a list a few years back, and you can find these places all over the world. And in all of these cities, you've got a very strong need for modern waste management facilities. Now, the issue is most cities will not proceed with these investments because they don't have the money to close the dump site and develop something better. Or they are afraid that the communities that scavenge on the landfills, they will lose their resources and get without livelihood, etc. And of course, no investor would put their money into just closing a landfill. Let's face it, there's no way you can recover your costs by only closing a landfill because you don't generate enough revenues out of it. But in Belgrade, we had one opportunity. It was the one to pioneer a new model, untested until now, about funding the remediation of the dump site to unlock the development of greenfield assets that would actually allow to generate revenues and repay the whole investment. And that's this energy from waste and this new landfill that you can see right behind me. And to develop all of these parameters in one single project, this requires a very integrated approach with multiple partners. And that's something only a few companies in the world like Suez can actually lead and deliver.
Thank you, Stephane. I mean, obviously, you've articulated the number of partnerships at different levels that it takes to make these projects successful, and definitely worth pointing out something I think you didn't say, but that This project was put together at a time when Serbia was just passing a PPP law at the federal level. And this was a municipality attempting to use that modality to attract the private partnership and investment that it needed to tackle such a substantial social and waste management issue as was the case in the Vincha landfill situation and to get all the benefits of the project. With that, maybe, Henri, I'll pass over to you to continue with the line of questions. Thank you, Stephane.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. So, Stephane, I think, you articulated, very well some of the, I think, the key enablers that made that project possible. Among them, Cheryl just mentioned maybe the PPP law, and maybe something you want to elaborate on. Obviously, the work with the different IFI, IFC, BRD, private partners, and also obviously the power purchase agreements that sort of help you generate those, part of those revenues. Was there any sort of other policy environments, laws or regulations that were critical in making that deal possible? And I think here, obviously, audience, there's a lot of policymakers from different countries, different cities that'd be very interested to know, what is it that they could do in their own cities that you've seen, maybe in the case of Serbia, but maybe not in other places, that really sort of enabled that deal to happen. No, you're on mute.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I think you actually hinted already a few of these key policy success factors that facilitated a project like Belgrade. The legal framework needs to be in place, and it needs to be sufficiently clear when it comes to PPPs, but also to waste management framework and regulations. Issues like environmental permits, and licenses, construction permits obviously are key. The energy law, especially when it comes to feed-in tariffs for renewables, must be in place. These are all important conditions to make a project like this possible. But now, if you look at the more success factors, I believe that particularly in emerging countries like Serbia, the availability of financing from IFIs is absolutely key. Obviously, because the project, the country has a given risk, and commercial banks would not provide this financing under what we call project finance, right? But now it's still not enough to have these conditions. I think what is key is to have a very robust PPP contract between the local government, in this case the city of Belgrade, and the investing private partner. And this PPP contract, it needs to provide for very clear allocations of roles and responsibilities, as well as performance and compensation mechanisms for each of the parties, right? And maybe the pitfall for many local governments who would like to develop similar projects is maybe the belief that the private sector is able to manage all the risks. And basically, the private sector will take money out of the project, but based on that, it should take all the risks that come with the project, and without any protections, any relief or entitlement to compensation under specific circumstances. And I think that due to that belief, as a result, time and again, we see tenders and contracts that are just way too unbalanced for us, for companies like Suez and our competitors as well, to take the risk of an immediate investment without fair chances of return on the long term. So I think quite interestingly, in Belgrade, the city had chosen a procurement method that is remarkably efficient, in my view, for such complex projects, and it's called competitive dialogue. And it's one of the methods, under the EU Public Procurement Directive, that actually, although Serbia is not part of EU, it has already adopted quite a bit of the EU legislation into its national legislation, among which the Procurement Directive and competitive dialogue. And in a competitive dialogue, in this kind of tenders, the city would first select, let's say, 4 to 5 bidders, competent ones, based on references. It's called a pre-qualification. And then the city would organize parallel sessions with each bidder to understand their appetite for certain risks and hear their suggestions as to how best achieve the project's objectives. And based on this, the city would be able to build its PPP contract, hearing, from the market what is doable and what's not. And when you hear from 4 or 5 different people separately that given risk is not acceptable, well, maybe it's effectively not acceptable, and you'd better not put that into your contract, because otherwise no one would bid, or the bid would be extremely onerous for the local government and would fail. So based on that feedback, the city would build its contract, then maybe have a few more iterations with the bidders, and finally offer the same contract for all to bid for and let the best win. And from our perspective, that's actually, it gives us a chance that the city and their advisors, they can listen from the real doers, not only from consultants, from the ones that will effectively put their money in the project and get the return only at the very end. So actually, this process is quite helpful to achieve a contract that is balanced, that is bankable, and that is biddable eventually. And I very truly believe that this process in Belgrade was absolutely key to achieving financial close, which happened only 2 years later, after we had obtained all the permits and negotiated the financing with IFC, EBRD, etc. So competitive dialogue, in my view, was a lesson learned from Belgrade and from a few other projects, which is extremely efficient when a local government wishes to develop such a project.
Thanks, Stephane. It's very interesting how, in that particular case, in effect, the government was leveraging a private sector experience to shape, not completely, but to finalize, I guess, the shape of the ultimate contract. So yeah, thanks so much for this insight. I think we'll add to the list of all the things that sort of helped that project happen. So we're going to stop with Stephane for now. Don't worry, he'll be back at the end of the session. So if you have questions for him, please put them in the chat and in the Slido. So we're going to move now to the second project. And first, I'm going to turn towards Roberto Babutti as the Chief Executive Officer of Corsan Water. Hi, Roberto. Thanks for joining us all the way from Brazil early in the morning. So first, I'd like to ask you to tell us a little bit about the project and why you choose to pursue this transaction, and especially I think the part around IFC utilities for climate, and explain us briefly what this is all about. Thank you.
Oh, hi, hi, Cheryl. Thank you very much. Thanks for the Global Infrastructure Hub for this invitation. I would like also to salute Stephane and Gustavo. Addressing your question, I'd just like to quickly make a summary that I joined Corsan in May 19, and then we had clearly huge challenges ahead, and we had a clear need of capital and also expertise. We needed to change the status quo and do things differently. The first major achievement was a PPP now with a private partner to accelerate the universalization of sewage collection and treatment in 9 municipalities that service about 1.5 million people. Next was the need to have a partnership with someone that would provide us both capital, but also expertise that would help us to tackle another very important issue we have, which is water losses. Also, we have losses in the range of 43–44%, which is a little above the Brazilian average of 39%, but that's quite high, no? And also the fact that our energy consumption is our second largest bill in the company, only after people, no personnel. So putting together this, no, and the fact that we also are looking for sustainability, and therefore the characteristic of this sustainability linked financing is that we decided to team up with IFC. We decided to do that in the beginning of last year, so it was more than a year of work together, no? And we managed to be the first Latin American company to be part of the U4C initiative, no? So to improve water resilience in the context of climate change. So we have as a target to reduce our water losses to 35% in until the end of 2024, which is still high, but is a significant reduction. No? And that also comes at a time that is quite important for us to have this commercial finance ahead of the IPO that we are planning for February of next year. And to summarize, also like to mention that we also committed to targets that are linked to a social environmental plan, which are very useful for us to deploy our strategy as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberto. So now, if I may turn to Gustavo Pimentel. Hi, Gustavo. So you're the managing director of Citawi, and obviously you specialize in sustainability linked financing. So could you share, I guess, some of the key features of the sustainability linked loan IFC provided to Corsan, and also maybe for the audience, whether you're seeing some trends in Brazil and maybe more generally in emerging markets when it comes to the use of green and sustainable financing especially for infrastructure projects.
Absolutely. Thanks to the GI Hub and IFC for the invitation, and I salute my fellow panelists here as well and the audience. Well, here at Citawi, we are a LATAM-based sustainable finance research and advisory practice. We have over 75 staff dedicated to the topic. And as part of this work, we've been involved in over 150 sustainability related credit transactions in Latin America in the past 6 years. So in some of these transactions, we had a role as the second party opinion provider or the external reviewer. In some other transactions, a minority, we were actually on the advisory side. So we were advising the issuer or a anchor investor to develop the framework for the use of proceeds or to develop the KPIs and targets for the sustainability linked portion of the loan or of the bond. So it's from this experience that I speak with you today. So the first thing which is quite innovative on IFC and Corsan's transaction, it's actually it's a dual transaction in this space because it has both a component of use of proceeds. So proceeds have to be directed to investments, mainly capital expenditures related to the water efficiency and reduction of water losses, but also energy efficiency and water efficiency investments in Corsan's infrastructure. So this could be, if Corsan IFC wanted, could be branded as a green loan as well. But it has the second feature, which is it's also addressed as a sustainability linked financing, in which the KPI of non-revenue water, which was being mentioned by Roberto, was picked as the KPI. And then there is this target of reducing the water loss to 35% over the tenor of the loan. So this dual approach is actually quite innovative. And it's actually generating us a problem because we keep a database on all of such transactions and we don't know in which category to place this one. So if you have an idea, if we should place as a user proceeds, either or a sustainability finance, let us know, because otherwise this is going to be double counted in the global statistics. Okay, so this is a problem we're having now. Specifically on the target, on the KPI and on the target chosen, we believed, and it was our opinion, that it was highly material to Corsan, but also it's highly material and it's capable of generating a lot of positive externalities to society and to the environment at large. So that was part of our opinion. Another feature is that this is a KPI which is tracked by all companies in the water space in Brazil, and it's actually consolidated at the federal level. So this is regulators in the water space and also the ministry responsible for water and sanitation control this KPI of every single water operator in the country. So it's completely benchmarkable and comparable. And also it has a feature of, it's already verifiable because there is a process that the companies go through with the ministry to verify the actual numbers. So in that sense, it was very interesting transaction and easy to trust the KPI and to trust the target and to trust the measurement of the KPI. And it's important to speak about the benefits, right? So if you reduce water losses, you're having less withdrawals from the water basin. You're postponing potential new infrastructure to capture or harvest water. You have operational efficiencies, and there is something else that we didn't discuss much, or sometimes we don't realize, which is there is a potential benefit to actual water consumers, because the water loss reduction during tariff revisions, right? And Roberto can touch upon this point better than myself. It's the company will capture some of this gains, but also consumers will receive some of the benefits in the form of reduced tariffs. But perhaps Roberto could explain more. So this is also an interesting feature. We didn't label this as a social bond because of this, but clearly there is also a social benefit to that. Well, speaking about the local market, if you allow me, I will show you only one chart which helps to make the point here. This is the evolution of Brazil's sustainable credit market over the years. And the green bar is the actual green bonds or green loans that were issued throughout the years. And you see that the green topic and operations based on use of proceeds were pretty much predominant up until 2020. And now in 2021, we actually have this emergence and dominance of the sustainability linked financing operations, either through bonds or loans. And this is actually almost $10 billion only in Brazil, only in 2021, up until the end of September. So it's pretty incredible to see how the market is picking up on this format, right? Which ties part of the interest spread to the achievement of the KPIs and the targets. We believe this is a strong trend in Brazil and the region, in Latin America as a region as well. Because when you do tie the conditions to the interest spread, you really put a very tangible benefit to the issuer or to the loan taker, and I believe there's quite a lot of players interested in capturing this potential benefit. When you have an operation based on use of proceeds, you have that promise that perhaps eventually you will be able to have like a better pricing for your bond, but we cannot guarantee that this will happen. And in this sustainability linked format, this is tangible, this is achievable, and this is agreed upfront. So we do believe this is going to keep growing.
Thanks, Gustavo.
Thank you so
Cheryl,
much.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. That was fascinating, and I'll come back to you with a couple of questions. But I want to come to Roberto again first, in terms of, it was already mentioned how difficult it is in so many markets to get private sector and commercial solutions into the water sector. Yet Corsan is a fabulous case where this has absolutely been true, and you've articulated on it. But even for that matter, Brazil is really ahead of so many markets in terms of really getting the business models and getting private capital there. So I'm wondering if you can maybe share, given this is a global audience, and I'm sure a number of other people are struggling to think, how is this even possible? Can you maybe share a few insights on enabling environment or other characteristics that have made this so successful and that might be taken on board to potentially have replication in other markets as well?
Yes, for sure. Well, I think we are living a kind of a watershed moment in the Brazilian water and sanitation industry. You know, this is a sector that was left behind for many years. You know, so in Brazil we have a huge deficit in terms of particularly sewage collection and proper treatment. Also in the provision of water in terms that are adequate, but certainly on the topic of sewage that is even more clear. You know? And there are reasons for that. I think one of those is that this sector, you have concessions that are granted by municipalities. So in the end, you have this political influence, you know, in the sector over the years. There is some type of perception of that. In the end, these investments, they are mostly underground. They are not perceived by the population. So people say this kind of investments don't bring votes immediately. So you have this kind of an issue. And you have an issue of regulation, because in many municipalities you have different rules, and investors are kind of scared about that. So what happened in Brazil is that in the beginning of this year, particularly on March, it was finally passed a new legislation for the sector. So this new legislation basically requires that the contracts they have to be all amended in order to have very clear rules about what are the targets in terms of water, sewage, and collection, and the amount of water that is supplied. And there's a crucial deadline for that, which is 2033. So now we're exactly in this process of amending our contracts, and we are in a situation that we needed to, reinvent Corsan. Just to give an idea, we have our investment plan recently certified by an international company, and it states that we need to invest about 11 billion reais, roughly $2 billion, which means that we need to more or less triple the amount of investments that Corsan has on an average base on a yearly basis. So we have to change that. So we need to go after capital. We need to go after expertise. And so far, this sector in Brazil is basically served by state-owned entities. Now, with these rules and these challenges, is requiring that companies to be privatized, or that they do PPPs, or they go for IPOs, still keeping the state control, which is less obvious, no? So this is basically requiring these changes. The contracts, they also need to have targets, for instance, in terms of non-revenue water, and new rules, benchmarks, and parameters are also being set by a national regulator. So the regulation still will be at a municipal level, but you have to be compliant with this national guidelines. So this is bringing also more comfort to the investors to be able to allocate additional capital in the sector. And just to finalize, I would say that this is something that is happening in a context where I guess this a global phenomenon, but also in Brazil now that we have faced severe droughts recently. So now, as we speak, we're facing situations of rationing or quasi-rationing, in certain areas of Brazil, mostly in the center-south portion of Brazil, but also we are in a very deep energy crisis because Brazil is the hydroelectric power is the basis of our power system. So this transaction that addresses the non-revenue water and also the energy efficiency comes at a unique momentum, I would say. So that's what's going on in Brazil, and I certainly think for other nations that are facing similar challenges to the ones of Brazil, there's certainly lessons learned to see what's going on now, because it's really changing the scene in the sector and making people think differently and go for private partnerships and become much more efficient.
No, thank you, Roberto. Very clear that regulations at different levels with incentives and even ambitious sort of compliance mandate targets, all part of the secret sauce that sort of made it work in Brazil and can certainly be food for thought for other markets. I know we're running short on time, but I do have one final question that I think will link that back to Gustavo. Gustavo, thank you previously for explaining so clearly sort of the difference between use of proceeds and then outcome-based type of sustainability-linked financing. I think that feeds in very nicely to what Roberto was articulating in terms of sort of the ambitious, beyond compliance, outcome-based targets that are behind sustainability-linked financing. So maybe in a minute or so for the audience, if you could just quickly articulate how can other corporates or players that are listening today get that beyond compliance mindset or start thinking about where they might have sustainability-linked financing type opportunities or where they can switch their mindset in that regard as well?
Absolutely. The number one recommendation is get started now and write your sustainable finance framework. A sustainable finance framework is a short document where you identify, based on your investment plan, the use of proceeds that could be labeled as green, social, sustainable. In order to do that, you can look at the thousands of other transactions that already happen. Many, I would guarantee that a transaction happened in your sector somewhere in the globe. So you can take a look at that, but you can also look at taxonomies that define what is an eligible green, social, or sustainable project or asset. We have very known the European Union taxonomy. We have the Climate Bonds Initiative taxonomy. Here in Brazil, we have like our own taxonomy. We call it the coolest bonds. It's a publication that we had a couple of years ago. So get your framework ready for the use of proceeds. And then for outcomes based, what I would say is that most companies nowadays will have a sustainable development plan or an ESG strategy with objectives, targets, KPIs, etc. So look into those and try to think which of those KPIs and targets you could link to such transactions. And in order to do so, you have to reflect whether achieving these targets is actually benefiting society and the planet at large. So it cannot be just a KPI or a target that will benefit yourself. So there must be a positive impact, a positive externality to the world. If you need help doing that, there are plenty of technical assistance available. IFC is a big name on technical assistance to help you develop your framework. There are other players as well. So I really encourage you to engage IFC and other players for such support.
Thanks, Gustavo. So now we're going to move to the audience questions. So the first one we'll try to, Stephane, if you can try to answer it, so that we can ask a few more questions from the audience. There's a lot tonight. It's really around, I think it's a question from small cities. So, I mean, obviously, Belgrade is still a rather large city. So what is it that the public sector, especially in sort of smaller places, could do? I mean, we've talked about the partnering, the procurement, etc. Are there other incentives, especially when it comes to the private sector, that will convince the private sector to invest, or at least consider investments in waste to energy or other municipal type of projects?
Well, I guess many of the criteria we described apply whether it's a large city or a smaller city. Obviously, from a technological point of view, you've got scale effects, right? And a waste to energy plant for a few tens of thousand tons of waste a year will not make sense. So there are two ways to tackle this. Maybe in terms of waste management, it's quite useful from time to time to unite, right? To build up larger, communities, or in order to gather more feedstock for waste project, for instance. But I've got an example of a city in Poland, 40,000 people, where we developed a wastewater treatment plant under a PPP model. Then it's far simpler in terms of financing and so on. But it will always take a balanced contract, one that has been carefully designed and where the risks are properly allocated. I think it's really, for me, as far as I'm concerned, a key success factor. I mean, there's no project without a good contract, and a good contract is seldom designed only by any of the parties by themselves. Right? It's a joint effort, and competitive dialogue for that is very powerful again.
Thanks. So contract and potentially project bundling, or at least aggregation, so that you create scale.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, Stephane. Lots of audience questions coming in, but one that seems to be pretty popular, and I'll direct this one to you, Roberto, as a CEO who's done, as Gustavo was articulating, sort of the green, sustainable type financing. Curiosity around how you see companies such as yours and others possibly using green loans or green bonds, or maybe even blue loans and blue bonds, going forward, particularly within the sustainability-linked financing context as well. Maybe a few thoughts in that regard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think our sector has this characteristic, that to be able to have one of those alternatives is something that is naturally connected to what we do. So, as Gustavo was explaining, also there's a multitude of externalities, positive externalities that we are able to do by deploying capital in a way that will bring benefits for the different dimensions, environmental, social, government. So this is really something that to me is kind of almost natural. We besides this IFC loan that we are very proud of, we just got an award 2 days ago from Latin Finance, that our debenture that we issued earlier on this year was considered the best financing for the sector in Latin America, and that was also a sustainable linked bond. So I think going forward, I think that's kind of natural, and I would say it's kind of not. I would say the other way around. To do something different from that, it would be a little of a puzzle to me, because that's really the natural thing to do.
No, obviously a major step back from where you are today. And I think actually for everyone in the markets today, absolutely the way to be looking forward. Maybe building on that, a question for Gustavo, another audience question that came up that's very much focused on sort of the what next and going forward. What trends or insights might you have for emerging market companies that want to be looking to tap into international capital markets or access international investors? And with respect to these types of instruments, any trends or tips that you might be able to share? I think you're on mute, Gustavo.
Sorry, from the volumes I've shown you for Brazil, the outcomes based, around 70–80% of that was actually international, issued in hard currency, but it was issued by companies which are listed in the stock exchange. They're kind of Brazilian blue chips, but they already have access to international markets. We see some transactions here of the smaller companies, sometimes debuting in international markets, and typically the way to go is to have a structure where a player such as the IFC or not the development bank can, prepare the company and structure in a way that distributes the risk. Sometimes it's an AB loan. Sometimes you're gonna have a portion which is in local currency and another one in hard currency. So you have some hedge on your currency exposure. So it's not that easy, because there's always going to be this thing about the minimum ticket size for a bond issuance in hard currency, and that's hard. That's hard even for Corsan, for instance. Like Corsan's operation wouldn't possibly make a benchmark size bond in USD. So you have to look for such alternative routes, and especially if you are in emerging markets which have some depth on local capital markets. I would also encourage to develop and tap local investors. This is something we've been seeing in Brazil. So as long as you have a local market as well for green sustainable linked, I believe the international investors may come to the local market and operating in local currency as well. So we start to see this developing in Brazil. It could take a little more time in some other markets. But again, if companies wants to tap international directly and they are still considered small, find the alternative routes, partner with IFC and others to get there.
Thank you, Gustavo. I think that unfortunately we had time. There was quite a few other questions that were in the chat. So thanks for the audience providing those. Some of those answers are, you could find them on the website. So there's a common website between GIHub and IFC that's got the case studies from this session and the previous one as well. And then we'll obviously have the next one as well. So yeah, I'd like to thank again Stephane, Roberto, and Gustavo, and my co-presenter Cheryl as well, for participating in this session. Before I need out Cheryl for final comment, in the chat you'll see that we have put the registration link, for session 3. So the continuation of that webinar series, it will be focused in November on the de-risking of greenfield investment, which is obviously a key challenge, especially in emerging markets. So the registration is open, and yeah, we encourage you to register, and we'll have hopefully, and I'm sure another insightful and interesting discussion. So on this, I thank you all for joining us tonight, and Cheryl, I'll get it back to you.
Thank you, Henri, and thank you also, Stephane, Roberto, and Gustavo. Really engaging conversation, and maybe just a couple of closing reflections. I mean, clearly started by articulating how big of the challenge, but also the opportunity for cities for green, sustainable, addressing the needs of the population worldwide are at this point in time. And obviously water and waste, for the reasons articulated, some of the hardest infrastructure services to be done in a private capital type of context, yet we've heard fascinating stories of what it takes, how it's possible, and really can be done going forward. So just to repeat a couple things that I heard, predictable markets, good regulation, contracts that work with good allocation of risk and reward, ambitious regulators that want to be a partner with the private sector, but set targets that are ambitious, that incentivize, investment to follow, to address the needs. And with that comes really interesting and innovative approaches to financing that can support that going forward, again, in commercial private context, including not only green bonds, blue bonds, but the new sustainability linked financing that has been described here today as well, which is so exciting because it goes beyond the use of proceeds to really focusing on sustainable outcomes, what needs to be done to achieve them beyond compliance, and then rewarding and scaling going forward. So really exciting space. IFC is delighted to be a partner with players in this, innovating and bringing it into emerging markets, but equally delighted to be a partner with Global Infrastructure Hub in this webinar series. And as Henri already said, stay tuned for the third one to come for a continuation of this dialogue, bringing in firsthand experts that can share their experience in these topics of what's needed to link private investment and infrastructure going forward. So thank you everyone for joining. Fantastic dialogue. And again, particularly thank you to Stephane, Roberto, and Gustavo for your insights.
Thank you, Henri.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Bye.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a nice day.